Oh hey look, that one movie you were all upset about came out and was fine, just fine, mystery solved. Now if half of the internet would please shut the fuck up about its masculine insecurities, and the other half would please take a breather from jizzing all over a B-plus movie destined to be best remembered as that thing you saw Kate McKinnon in right before she really blew up, everything can get back to sort of normal. Anyway, to celebrate me probably not having to do another fucking Ghostbusters episode for a while, here are the 10 worst movie remakes of all time. Think of it as a palate cleanser. Number 10, Conan the Barbarian. Hey, guess what we ain't doing in this list? That's right, wasting time parsing whether or not this was actually a remake because they're both loose adaptation of Robert E. Howard short stories. They used the same title, they both did the same basic You Killed My Village story. The only reason to make a new Conan was the old Conan. It's a remake, and it sucked. Mainly because Jason Momoa is that rare breed of non-actor who's incapable of turning charisma into screen presence. He's like a jacked Polynesian Sam Worthington, but even then it shouldn't be this hard to make a good Barbarian movie. They had Rose McGowan, they had Ron Perlman. How do you fuck that up? Number 9, Planet of the Apes. Everybody likes the new Planet of the Apes remake so much they all pretty much forgot how bad it was when they let Tim Burton make one, but it's pretty goddamn bad all the same. Yeah, fine, the Rick Baker ape makeup was next level amazing and holds up just as well today, and Estella Warren was on hand, so that's fine, but the rest of it was a bafflingly inert borefest that even Mark Wahlberg doesn't look interested in, and that guy stayed engaged all the way through The Happening. Number 8, Clash of the Titans. You know, the original Clash of the Titans wasn't really that good of a movie outside the monsters, but the remake wasn't good at all. Supposedly it all got re-edited in post-production and they lost what the plot was originally supposed to be about, but given how airless and drab the whole affair is, how good could it have been from the beginning? I honestly like the sequel to this a little better, but by that point nobody really cared, and hell, just admit it, you haven't thought about either of these movies since they came out. Number 7, The Heartbreak Kid. They say you can't go home again, and in this metaphor, you refers to the Farrelly brothers, and home refers to trying to make There's Something About Mary happen twice by ramping up the raunchy jokes in an otherwise weak retread of an old Charles Grodin movie about a guy who meets the woman of his dreams while he's on his honeymoon. You'd think it'd be impossible to make a bad sex comedy out of such a killer premise, and admittedly it starts with an interesting reversal on the original, where Ben Stiller marries what appears to be the perfect woman in Malin Ackerman, only to discover that she's annoying and possibly psychotic, and that he's also falling for a more normal and interesting woman in Michelle Monaghan, but eventually it's just a bunch of weak 90s style naughty humor landing about a decade out of date. Number 6, The Fog. John Carpenter doesn't think The Fog is one of his better movies, which goes to show you that even geniuses get it wrong sometime. The original The Fog is great, and this remake is easily one of the worst horror do-overs of all time, usually overlooked only because it's so bland you forget about it pretty much before it's even over. Tom Welling was in this, speaking of things you forgot existed. Number 5, The Wicker Man. I almost want to leave this one off the list entirely because it's become such a meme for the whole Nicolas Cage as a bad actor thing, which pisses me off in general because yes, he's been in a lot of bad movies, but he's way too unusual of a performer who takes way too many genuinely interesting chances to be called bad, but man, this movie really is even worse than you've heard. And worst of all, if you watch this version, you're going to spoil the original for yourself, and that's just tragic because that is a goddamn classic. Number 4, The Stepford Wives. The original Stepford Wives is a classic of the paranoid sci-fi horror genre, a dark thriller about an independent-minded woman who comes to suspect that the men of her suspiciously perfect old-fashioned suburb have been killing their wives and replacing them with submissive, housework-minded 1950s-style robot duplicates. What better way to make use of an evergreen idea like that than to turn it into a dumb comedy that ends up chickening out on its own premise? It's another one of those movies like Bewitched, where it feels like they thought casting Nicole Kidman as the embodiment of an idealized 1950s housewife archetype was so inherently clever that the movie would just take care of itself, and neither one did. Number 3, Godzilla. The most recent American remake of Godzilla wasn't all that hot either, but let's not let it obscure how bad Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich's version from 1998 truly was. Most of the criticism has continued to center around the truly terrible monster design, but the fact that it's also a terrible script and an oddly boring for a follow-up to Independence Day shouldn't be forgotten either. Even if they had bothered to put something that looked like Godzilla in this Godzilla movie, it still would have sucked. Number 2, Psycho. The fact that remaking Hitchcock's Psycho was such a manifestly bad idea on its face should have actually made this attempt to do so interesting. Since you can't really hope to equal or surpass something so iconic, this should have been an attempt to experiment, try something new, use the well-known template of the classic to play around with a new idea. That's what Rob Zombie did with Halloween, and say what you want about those two movies, they're interesting. Instead, Gus Van Sant pretty much burned up his mainstream studio goodwill on a shot-for-shot remake that wasn't actually shot-for-shot, or any good whatsoever. Number 1, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. What else could it be? Oh hey, Tim Burton's here again, look at that. Even before we all got sick of Johnny Depp, this was already the nadir of what popular culture was willing to tolerate from the once-can't-miss actor-director duo. Yes, fine, it's closer to the book than the original version that everyone liked was, but so what? At least that version didn't try to shove a stupid-ass origin story for Willy Wonka into the proceedings, or weirdly evoke the accusations against Michael Jackson, which predictably makes the film feel even more dated and sleazy now that the real Jacko has passed on. In retrospect, the whole thing feels like some kind of conceptual art project. What's the least likable version we can make out of something everybody loved? So yeah, there you have it. Agree, disagree, let me know in the comments, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Come back next week and I'll have something more interesting than a list, I promise.